So you know what Major Winter said, don't call here ever again, giving us crap for missing an intercept. That's when you get frustrated.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
That's when you get frustrated as a fighter pilot, Rain, as you well know.
Yeah.
You go, okay, I'll give you a solution. And I'm sure they put it up to flagpole, and the flagpole said, no, I don't want to do that. So, okay, don't call here again. And they didn't.
Right. I mean, that's like probably as old as time, right? Like politics get involved in whatever conflict we see it today. Happened to you, happened to Vietnam, happened to World War II. You know, it's always happened. Like, Paul, what's the objective? Is it to win? All right, go out there and win, and we're not going to care about.
But then, you do realize you're a pawn. And I actually, said at that point to all my bros, I said, okay, somebody has just proven to me there is absolutely nothing here to die for, which is not the best place to be as a fighter pilot, in my opinion.
Tower, Atlanta is release you, runway 4 left, 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seats high, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2.
My burn rep curve was at 354. So yeah, that's on. Next picture 16, 15,000. I'll give you some of that.
Viper on target.
All right, sir. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Now everything can be used against us, so we'll be off to the races here.
Okay.
Well, sir, again, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Excited to have a conversation today, learn a little about you, career, and everything in between. Really, with that, kind of kick it off with what got you going down this path in the first place? How did you end up flying a fast jet? What was that path? What was that interest for you?
Well, Rain, I'm one of those that was able to realize my dream since I was 3 years old. My dad was ended up being a chief master sergeant in the reserves and was around airplanes and was a flight engineer on 124s. So I was enthralled with airplanes since I can remember. Today they would have sent me to the school counselor for all the doodles I did of stick airplanes dropping bombs on stuff and blowing up. It was just something I always wanted to do since I was 3, which I think, troubled my father quite a bit. He was always saying, well, what's the backup? Because he realized how, much of a dream, you can dream it all you want. We've all known guys that wanted to fly fast airplanes or airplanes in general that just didn't turn out. And it could be physical, it could be ability, it could be whatever, especially the fighter pilot thing, as we know, pretty much the top of a class gets a fighter. And so that's even another way to be disappointed. So he kept wanting me to have a backup. So my backup to make him happy was, okay, I'll go be a lawyer. Luckily, that didn't happen for all those people out there that need a lawyer and for me. And so I never wavered. I'm never a fireman, a policeman, a this, or that. 3 years old until the day I strapped on a fighter for the first time.
That's awesome. And you're right. I literally just had this conversation about 20 minutes ago of how fortunate I am to be in this spot today. And it's not lost on me. Sure, I will gripe and complain with the best of them about random stuff, anyone who listens to the podcast. But I don't forget the fact, again, how blessed I am to do it because, I don't have any medical issues. Like things like, how many buddies I'm sure you had like going through the pipeline, get to the medical phase, and it turns out you got a heart murmur or some weird pressure in your eyeball, and you are not pilot qualified. Yeah,
you're done. And the other thing I think along with that is, I've always been, luck is very important for all of us. I don't discount luck. But also, as I preach throughout my leadership times, let the preparation meet opportunity. 100%. So always be prepared for the next thing. Don't let you be the limfac. So
that's I try to instill that, my oldest son right now, right? As we're building that foundation, opportunity meets preparedness. Always being ready for that next ride you're opted for, because you never know when you're gonna get thrown into it, and that's your time to perform, and that might be your only shot to actually perform and put you on a different path. You just never know it. So,
and my career, as we discussed this, there's many opportunities where, I was given, this is your shot kind of thing, and maybe we'll talk about that. And I'll never forget it. a squadron commander of mine who gave me one of these shots, in more colorful language than I'll use, said, "This is your chance. Don't screw it up." And that was his only advice.
Be a champion. There is no plan B. You know?
Well, as we used to say, as a pep talk, don't suck.
Yeah. It's simple and it's really straightforward. Just don't suck.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah.
None. I have none. I had a squadron commander early on, and I remember his advice. This is actually in pilot training. His advice was just be the best, be number one. I mean, that's it, right? Like that was advice. You're like, okay, well, all right, you gotta square the corner and figure out how to be number one. But that, I mean, it's pretty simple in the end. Like you'll figure it out, or I guess you won't, you know.
You're talking about your son. I'm already on the next generation. So I have a 12-year-old grandson who wants to be a fighter pilot. That's what he tells me anyway. And sometimes he's a little lazy in his stuff. He has all the talents, I think, and smarts, but he'd rather, be on Minecraft or something when he should be doing something else. So I keep trying to instill that from the next generation. It's a little bit harder, but still, he's got to do it for himself eventually.
All right, so here's the question for you, the honest reflection. As I look back, and again, this came up in the conversation, I do think I was fortunate to have a lot of mentors that helped me along the way and keep the bumpers on the rails to keep me moving down the path. Because as a teenager, I was motivated. I knew what I wanted to do. The jobs I got, the clubs I participated in, I would say the vast majority of that, I think I put forth effort and made a conscious decision to pursue those paths because I knew, all right, hey, going into the Air Force, ROTC, or the Academy,
right,
they're looking for leadership. So, whatever sport you're doing, like I need to be the team captain eventually, or I'm working, I need to be trying to get some kind of leadership role inside that organization to build that, for lack of a better phrase, that resume at that standpoint. That said, there are definitely times when I was not firing at 100%, or I was, the best. I could have been better. And had I not had those mentors, and had I not had that guidance, that maybe I would not be sitting here today, and I wouldn't have done all the things I've done up until this point. So, do you think the 12-year-old grandson is that normal now that we're playing Minecraft? And would we be playing Minecraft? Like
probably anything,
I think
anything doing with the hands and trying to shoot something, I probably would have been caught in that world. And so I try to realize that with him. And, he's only 12. And I said, it's really going to start mattering soon if you really want to do this. And so, I'm slowly getting through to him.
Yeah. No, I tell my son too. I had this realization, obviously, after the fact. And the unfortunate piece, if you want to do this, with few exceptions, your runway is pretty short. Like you taxi onto the numbers like in middle school, I feel
absolutely.
Like.
That's where he is. Yeah.
That's where it starts. And I mean, really, by the time you're a sophomore, definitely into like if sophomore, you're rotating and you're taking off. And I mean, it's your senior year, that's already lost. Like it's already set in stone, right? And again, not saying you can't find this later on down the path. Like people absolutely in their 20s and even 30s say, hey, I want to do it. But it is exponentially more difficult, I think, join the military to be an officer, to join the military, be an officer, and go fly planes. It just gets tougher and tougher the older you get. And you have the reserve guard kind of purview, and you can probably talk to this down the road, right? But I've definitely talked to multiple people who are in their 30s trying to do this.
Right.
Even if you have it, like a lot of those units are looking at you like, I mean, kind of old. I could hire the 23, 24-year-old and get a lot more juice out of the squeeze than someone in their 30s. So.
And you bring up a good point. I am a big proponent of a young person going on active duty. As we've talked about, and you've had Bender and other people, to take somebody from zero to hero in the Guard or Reserve is difficult. You have to make a concerted effort with your limited sorties to give that person the background that the active duty would give them. At the same time, you have to hire some of those young people because you can't have all these old majors or senior captains. So you need to trickle them in, but you got to work at it. And when I was the squadron commander, when we picked a guy who's now a 2-star general and weapons school graduate, I said, okay, everybody, 7 of us have to give up a sortie every month, which is not that big a deal. I said, but he's getting 15 sorties a month, not 8, not 9. He needs 15. And, he hates me for this a little bit now. And I said, and he gets a fighter weapons school brief and debrief every day. And unfortunately for him, he got a fighter weapons school brief every day of his bringing up, which made him a great fighter pilot. But he was like, oh, it's going to end.
Yeah. Just jab a pin in my eye. Wow. But that is true, right? And I've said I haven't done that. We've talked about like on the bro chats, like an interesting concept of we did 2 of these kind of back to back with like the deep dives into the hiring piece.
Right.
Which it's such a unique world that you're hiring someone off the street. And then again, you hear the guys talk about like the pedigree that people are rolling in with to compete. Like Hill with Conan talking on the podcast, like the last group, I mean, it might have been like 900 applicants. I'm screwing the numbers up, right? But then they invited almost like 300 out there for 2 or 3 slots. And then I think they got a couple AFRIC, the Air Force Reserve, like give me slots, right? But I wouldn't have made it. There'd been no way.
In the Forrest Gump world that I live in, because maybe as we go through this, I just happen to be at the right time. It almost feels like Forrest Gump. And many times, you were there for that event. You were there for that event. I was there at Hill. We were having a 60th reunion kind of thing of when the reserve started. I was there when those Appies were there. I was in the bar with them that night. And, of course, they're all eager and they're all on their best behavior. But, yeah, there wasn't one that, of course, they had narrowed it down. There wasn't one that I talked to that I went, well, he's better than I am. Pretty sure. At least starting out. But, and that's the strange thing. For years and years and years, we have tried to figure out a way that I can look at Rain Waters and say, F-16 pilot, he's going to be an F-16 pilot. Here, take this test, take this, what do you see with this picture? What do you see with this picture? Anyway, we're going to figure out with these psychiatrists how we build a fighter pilot. Haven't been able to do it. The 50 years I've been associated with it, more or less. We cannot pick a guy and go, that guy is going to be great in pilot training. That guy is going to be a great fighter pilot. It is one of those things that must be done to excel and succeed.
Yeah, I don't know, even AI and things like that as it comes on, like, would you be able to figure that out? I mean, maybe they'd be able to square the corner and sort that. But I would say even too, inside the fighter squadron, I think the diversity, and maybe people make argument, wow, it's not really like diverse, but I'd talk about like the diverse backgrounds for where people come from. We had someone who grew up basically like never wearing shoes, like out in an in the middle of like the New Mexico desert, right? Like very like hippie, completely different than my upbringing. And so you do see people who we got musicians, we have athletes, we have hunters, like everything in between, computer nerds, and there's
I got one for you. When I was an aggressor, we had a pig farmer, and he grew up as a pig farmer, and he was one of the best sticks we had. I mean, you just can't figure it out. And until you strap a mask on, as well as anybody, till you pull those G's, till you're sweating, till you're tired, you just don't know it. And I used to laugh about this. I had some compatriots that were brilliant. I mean, Rhodes Scholar type guys that could fly an airplane like nobody's business. And then I knew guys that were very, very smart that thought too much in the air. And I'd say, what were you thinking? They go, well, I was thinking of this. I go, no. At that point, you only need to be thinking about this. And you're thinking about too much stuff. Let it come to you and do. Don't think.
Yeah.
And so, again, you can't really figure that out.
Maybe I think I did a pretty okay. And maybe that's because I'm not that smart. And
that's how I am.
Yeah, it's like, I had no idea anything else was going on around me, but I was able to solve this one problem because I didn't have any essay on anything else, So.
Well, there's a guy out there, and I hate to drop names, but I just thought it was so funny, and I'll get it wrong, I'm sure, but his call sign is Potato, and the way it is please only one thing at a time or something.
It's like, my wife gives me grief for like, oh, you can't multitask. Like, how much money did the military spend on you to multitask? Like, yeah, it was a multitask in a very
prioritize is different than multitasking. I can prioritize.
Right. Yeah, and when I key the radio, I mean, I'm gonna like every brain bite's gonna make sure that at least try and sound cool because I know that's documented forever. So
Forever.
you can't botch that one up. But
Forever.
yeah, it's interesting to see.
Well,
obviously, if there was a way to sort that out, we'd do it by now for sure.
Yeah, maybe we could, just delve quickly into my journey to the front seat, because it's a fairly long one, but it's a lot of roadblocks along the way. And you and I briefly spoke about it on the phone. Went to college, got my ROTC, pilot slot, all the things. But I was caught up in that 76, 77 where they had done a big Vietnam drop, but then they kept talking about how they were going to have to figure this out and do the math and ramp back up. So we were all hoping on the edge of the ramp up. And when it came to graduation day, they went, no pilot slot. So I said, okay. I took that LSAT. I didn't do that great because I really didn't put that much effort into it. Maybe I should rethink that. And then it came back to me, my ROTC detachment said, but, we were able to get you one of the Navigator slots. Do you want? And I thought long and hard about it. Of course, I went to the Navy real quick and said, hey, college graduate ROTC, what do you think? And they went, no way. Went to the Army and I said, I'll fly helicopters for you if you'll send me to OTS first. And they go, no, we'll send you to helicopter school, sign right here, and then you can apply for OTS. And I said, talk to the Chief Master Sergeant about that, because my gut said not a good deal. He said, you'll be a warrant officer for the next 10 years maybe. They're not going to play that game. And I said, okay, enough of that. So I went to Nav school, and frankly, I was never that enthusiastic about celestial navigation, sitting in the planetarium, and some of the other things that went with that. So I was an eager student in that I wanted to graduate. And we had a lot of people in the class. I think we had 50 some people. And then as it starts breaking down, I wanted a fighter, obviously, and it didn't look like we were going to get many fighters. And about that time, the electronic warfare schools started coming around and trying to talk us into going to beeps and squeaks school for 5 months. And their sale was, we are ramping up for the F-4G Wild Weasel. And so we are going to dump a bunch of EWOs, electronic warfare officers, into the F-4 community so that we can then send them after a tour to the F-4G, which is coming online. So I said, boy, if I didn't like celestial navigation, I don't know how much I'm going to like sitting in a lab listening to woo, woo, and identifying it. But I said, well, you got to do what you got to do. So I sat through those labs where, you sat there in the dark, it was much like the hearing test that we're all familiar with. Press the button. And I'm like, that must be a fan song, I mean, it was grueling. It was grueling, I'm telling you. I mean, days, and you had to pass it because there were sections. There was that section, then the B-52 section, then the tactical section. So you had to pass it. This is after the initial electronics part. I was okay with that. I had taken enough classes that I knew enough about electricity to be okay. So after I passed that's a fan song, then it was my favorite, which was the B-52 simulator. And the simulator then, when you graduated from that school, you were pretty much a full-up B-52 electronic warfare officer. So you went to Leningrad and Stalingrad in the sim, and it was all manual. For AI, as I recall, and it's probably changed, but for AI, it was automatic. It knew how to jam AI radars. But for every other surface radar, you had to cover it with a jammer by dialing these dials and playing Minecraft or something up and down.
Yeah.
You had to pass that part too. And I'll never forget it because we got assignments. And once again, you guys bring it up all the time. They might have exaggerated because we got one F4 out of 10 of us. And I got that, luckily. That's the luck part. Just got it. I don't know how to this day. And, we hadn't taken our B-52 check ride. And there were a few, cranky old guys. And they were like, you still have to pass the B-52 part. I'm like, okay, let's go to Leningrad, baby. Yeah, so we did.
What?
Go ahead.
I'd be actually curious. I got two questions. One, actually, let's back up a little bit before this too, because I always ask kind of guys coming out of your peer group. You're on the tail end of Vietnam,
right?
From what my understanding, right, looking at history and the news, not very popular. And so different from my generation, where I would say just a wave of patriotism, everyone's thanking for your
Right.
service, not the same environment. Were you attuned to any of that? Did that
Oh, yeah.
impact your
It
decision?
didn't.
Like,
No, I grew up, as I said, more or less in a military family, and so kind of isolated from that. And by the time when I started college, we had kind of left Vietnam. I went to a small college in Maryland, so they weren't protesting anything. They were trying to get to the beach. We were 30 miles from the beach, so they were more concerned about that than protesting. And we had to wear our uniforms, I think, once a week or something. And I really never got any grief. I think probably what set you apart back in those days was the short hair. I mean, everybody had long hair, so it was like, yeah, well, that guy, he's a little strange. But none of I didn't face any of the hey, what are you doing? Why you want to do that?
okay.
And I hung out with guys. Interestingly enough, my roommate, not knowing each other before then, was bent on being in the PLC Marine program. So that's all we talked about. We had airplane pictures all over the room, and the guy across the hall was already in PLC with the Marines. So you kind of hung out with those guys, and that roommate. I'm glad that we didn't have cameras back then, because that roommate ended up flying Marine One for Bush One and Clinton, flying the president around. Like I said, we were lucky not to have cameras.
Yeah, the poor generations now, like there's no hiding any of it.
Right.
Interesting too, right? So the F4G coming online, and you've kind of talked. So obviously pilot training has changed drastically in just the last like 5 or 6 years. I can't even wrap my head around what's transpired with pilot training. So
sure.
I think the same with CISO, WISO.
I can't keep track.
Yeah, it's tough. But when I was going through pilot training, the Navigator piece of it, from what I understood, they would go through like a T6 pipeline down at Pensacola. They do T6 backseat rides, and I would say maybe quasi getting them ready for a fighter, WISO type backseat. And then they would have some, not T1, like Learjet, and then like a C-43. I'm probably it's like a 737 platform.
737.
Yeah, I think they've over time doing like they would still do celestial navigation, as you've already alluded to. Like, but like how, like your pipeline where you've mentioned the B-52 EWO training. How did the lab separate you out? Did the B-52, like, was there like any kind of fighter type backseat? Because you got a backseat of an F4 puking your brains out.
At the beginning of nav school back then, you took like 2 or 3 T-37 rides, and it basically was familiarization with a mask and don't puke, and here's a map, follow us along on this map, frankly. You got a rating for that. So there was something like, okay, this kid puked the whole time and couldn't look at the map, and I don't know where that went in the hierarchy, but you did get a rating. I did fine on that. Didn't know what I was doing, but it was the same, read a map like you're in a car. And then we did a lot of C-43, I guess that's what it was, a lot of celestial, and, in the planetarium. It was 8 months, and it was a lot of ground stuff. And, the celestial thing looks simple, but I remember, the panic to this day, because what happens is, at least back then, now I'm sure you just push a button, but I'm sure that's what you do. You push a button that says, look here at this azimuth, and you'll find your star. Well, you had to go into these giant books that were like encyclopedias for the day of the year and figure out where Sirius was and where this was. And you did all this pre-computations, and then you're out there and you're shooting the cells. Well, I'll tell you what, you spin that sextant, you'll find a dot. And if your pre-calculations are wrong, you'll have a dot. And you had only so much time in between the shots. So what would happen is you'd shoot and you draw your triangle, and you're in the west, and the triangle has you over Greenland because you screwed up the pre-comps and you shot the wrong star. So now you're trying to figure out, you have about 7 minutes to try to get that triangle back to where you are by, we used to say, recomping the pre-comps to try to cheat it, but it never worked. So you'd have one of these triangles like way where you aren't. And as I recall, for a 6-hour flight, you could only have one of those triangles that didn't meet some criteria of being close. So it was a bit of panic every time you shot, because you knew where you were. And then when you drew that triangle with the shooting of the stars, you would just, wipe your brow when it came close to where you thought you were. And I didn't like that very much.
Yeah, hard pass. No thanks. I'll take the GPS, please.
Yeah. I mean, now, incredibly different. I mean, but still, I think they still teach that stuff for, as you talked about our friends before, if somebody shuts all that stuff down, somebody's got to be able to navigate somewhere. And sailors did it way back when. You will have to do it again.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to be your guy to navigate. This is like a big landmark. I'm like, okay, I can look out the window.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it today.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive to hear. And when you think about it, and for those like listening or watching, I mean, I'm thinking KC-135. I don't know if that still has a port, right? But like,
sure.
You open up the little bubble and like as you're doing the ocean crossing, like you're shooting stars to.
You got to be able to do that if everything goes away. And I can't imagine a scenario where the possibility of everything going away exists, and you still have to get where you're supposed to go.
Yeah, interesting. In my last big old fat plane flight, we had some pretty significant GPS jamming, right? So it's just we are really reliant upon it these days for a whole bunch of things. Hopefully, there are a lot of smart people who are working on this problem set, but yeah, I guess you can always look out the big window. But all right, sorry to interrupt there. But
no.
You go the F-4G out of Navigator training.
It was not even existent yet. In fact, in our EWO school, we had 3 former F4 guys that were now coming to backseaters, that were now coming through EWO school so they could be the cadre of the F4G. So it was still a little bit in front of us, and they really wanted all of those guys that did go to F4s to have 3 years of straight F4 time just as a wizzo to figure it all out before they had to add all the beeps and squeaks to it. And and those guys, that airplane and Desert Storm and subsequent to that before we replaced it, they did some incredible work, that concept, and lots of courage to face off with an SA-6. But I knew that was my path if I didn't get to the true path of pilot training. And I'd asked, early on, because I'm dumb, I said, hey, after I do all this stuff, I can go to pilot training, right? And of course they go, sure, yeah. And then as I start working it out, I go, there's like a 6% chance I'll go to pilot training. But then, with my eternal optimism or stupidity, I said, well, I'll be one of the 6% then. So off I go to F4s, and it was a great learning place for me, good and bad for some reasons, because all the guys I flew with, all the older guys, were all Vietnam guys. In my squadron, we had MiG killers, we had POWs. So these guys were real deal. They had done it for real, faced it all. And, the good part about that was, fear, ridicule, and sarcasm were the 3 words of the day, every day of my life in that squadron. That was good, actually. The bad part was, in some cases, was they had great disdain for anything they called Mickey Mouse BS, or any upper level officer who had either skated into Vietnam late just to get a touch and go, or, had hid in wing plans or something, and they knew who they were, And so that kind of rubbed off a little bit wrongly to a lieutenant and young captain that, that's BS. Don't worry about that. You can get away with that when you have 100 combat missions. Not so much when you have 100 hours in the back seat.
Right.
So you did learn the hard way, that didn't matter to you. But I had just great leadership, and it was a full up fighter squadron. They believed in, shoving you out front quickly and early. And, it's a lot like not my philosophy about throwing a kid in a pool and sink or swim, but in the fighter world, it was pretty much like that. And then the trust factor, unlike maybe later, it was pretty much, we're going to give you all the rope in the world. If you hang yourself, you're just stupid. So they would let 2 lieutenants take an F4 all over Europe cross country from Friday to Monday. If we did, as I look back, if we did dumb stuff, it was pretty much out of stupidity, not trying to shine our butts, But it did encourage you to grow up fast, for sure.
I feel like I've had really good bosses at times, right, who I think embrace some of that mentality of, delegating down, letting guys do what I think captains and lieutenants and young majors should be able to do without having to brief every little detail. And that's kind of I think that's how we built our fighting force. It predominantly our captains and majors are the tactical experts to go out there and run and flow to meet the ground commanders or to meet the commander's intent. But that doesn't always exist, right? And for lack of a better phrase, right, the CYA culture, like that sometimes that is a prominent feature a lot of times. So
yeah,
I assume you saw. I assume you have a couple thoughts on that, especially coming from.
Well, yeah, you knew, but justice was swift and terrible. I mean, if you did something, and a few did perhaps, that you weren't supposed to do that was just plain stupid, they would beat you terribly. I mean, you'd be grounded for however much time. You'd be snacko. You'd be opening pig or opening RSU for like 2 weeks to see how you like that at 4 a.m, watching gears with your binoculars. I mean, they had ways of getting back to you. It did not happen to me, luckily. We were pretty, we cared about the whole thing. And it was a big thing about not embarrassing the squadron or yourself. I mean, I don't know if you've read, many books on Vietnam. Ed Rasmussen, I think is his name. He has a great book, When Thunder Rolled. And it's him as a lieutenant flying 105s. It's a great book that everybody that wants to do this stuff should read. And I don't know if it was in that book or another book, Vietnam guys were basically saying, and they said this when I was a lieutenant, there are worse things than dying. And you sit there and you go, he goes, no. Embarrassing yourself and your squadron or being known as that guy that they got to throw a rock at to fly, that's worse in a fighter squad. And that was pretty melodramatic, but it actually sunk in. And you talk about letting people do things. So I'll fast forward a couple of assignments just for this particular vignette. So now I'm a flight commander in Korea. And, we had like 10 lieutenants in the squadron. And some of them were progressed faster than others, excuse me, and they some would stay past their year to upgrade to flight lead. And, I had 2 lieutenant flight leads in my command there. And so I said, okay. And they came to me one day and said, we want to fly together, lieutenant. And I said, okay, all right. I got to pass it by the boss just to make sure. So I went to the boss, I said, hey, I want these 2 clowns to fly together. And he did the, I don't know. I go, come on now. And I had to remind him how we grew up, and he's older than me. I said, I'm telling you, I'll set the guardrails. I'll make them tell me the plan, and I'll tell them that, I'm going to be watching every tape, when they get back. And so he said, okay, it's on you. So I said, okay, I'm good. So I go to him. I go, okay, you 2 clowns can fly together. I want to see the plan, before you step. And I'm going to watch the tapes when you get back. So don't do stupid stuff. And they were like 2 kids in a candy store. You can imagine 2 lieutenants that get to fly together in Korea, which back then was just a MOA. It really was. As long as you didn't fly over the Blue House, which is the president's house, the whole country was a MOA. So you could go anywhere, low level, pretty much. And we actually had even set up where we had the RF-4s come up from Kadena and take pictures of bridges and complexes and all these things. And we had them in a drawer, and that was your target. And you would go in just like, and put your finger in and go like that and go, today's target, gentlemen, is X. And then we would plan a route to get there. And that's what they did. But, it was because of the kind of responsibility I was given as a lieutenant that I said, this is important because if we go to war tomorrow, they'll be flying. And as soon as somebody gets shot down, he's going to be leading him. And I don't want that to be the first time when people are shooting at him. I want them to trust each other and trust to do the right thing.
Yeah, 100%. That doesn't always happen that way. So, it's good that when it does happen, because in the end, like you said, like, when the old joke, when 4 becomes 1, all of a sudden in the formation, right? And we're like,
yeah. You don't want it to be the first time.
Yeah, man, time to be a champion. Well, diving through that first assignment, walk me from there. What's the path to go into pilot training? How does that transpire for you?
Well, I made it known pretty soon, which was a mistake, that was my goal, because a lot of the Wizzos that hadn't got the opportunity, immediately said, yeah, whatever, pal. So I should have kept that to myself a little more. But anyway, a couple of the older guys said, hey, you want to do this? We've seen lots of guys go through this. And what they do is they want is stick time. They want to fly the airplane, do that. And they get very good at that, but they suck as a Wizzo. He goes, you don't get recognized by, being able to do barrel rolls from the back seat or refueling from the back seat, although that came later. You get recognized for being the Wizzo everybody wants to fly with because your stuff's together, you're a great crew member and all these things. So that really lit a fire under me, and I was eaten up with it. Back then it was 12 hours a day. I'm sure it still is in many areas. And I just worked my butt off as that. And actually that's where EWO school came in a little bit, because I was the squadron EWO. Every squadron had an EWO that teaches all the beeps and squeaks. So I got really smart about jammers and beeps and squeaks and tactical stuff. And eventually actually got recruited even as a lieutenant to go up to be the wing EWO. So all that was recognition, and then just, trying every day as hard as I could. So what ends up happening is, you need a leg up, and this is where the luck comes in. And we were at what we call WTD, which is a weapons tactics deployment to Spain. And the SAFE commander at the time, Chuck Gabriel, MiG killer in Korea, great man, was going to come down and fly with a squadron at their WTD. And so we had 2 squadrons from the wing down there. And that goes back to that comment I told you earlier, where my squadron commander came up to me and said, all right, this is your chance. Don't screw it up. And I said, what chance? He goes, General Gabriel's coming. You're going to prepare all the mission materials. You're going to brief the tactical part of the mission. You're going to do the entire debrief as the backseater, which is stuff we had done before. We wanted everybody to be able to do that. And he said, so this is it. This is the chance. And so the day comes, and the general's aide was a guy named Ed and Eberhardt, who you probably have heard of. He's a 4-star general, Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, head of Space Command, head of ACC. He was all-around great guy. He was a major then. He had been in our squadron, and he was kind of like shepherding this. And so apparently, he had keyed the general up to say, hey, this kid wants to go to pilot training. I was a lieutenant then. And, the squadron thinks enough of him to shove him in front of you. So I don't know how smart that is, but anyway, we did all that. We had a great mission. Nothing went wrong. And here's the part that is terribly funny and humiliating for me. So you can imagine now the general is having an all call, and in front of 2 squadrons. So he's kind of standing out in the bar, probably 30 or 40 feet from everybody, and they're asking questions. And then Eberhardt, grabs me and brings me over the bar and says, Trapper, buy the General Budweiser and take it to him. And I said, no, I'm not buying this beer and taking it across that open space to the general in front of 2 fighter squadrons. And at that point, he was very adamant and said, I told you what to do, Lieutenant. And I said, okay. So I buy the Budweiser, and I no sooner cracked, the open space when the cat calls started. I mean, 2 squadrons worth of smooching noises and all this stuff. Couldn't have been more embarrassing. But I kept saying, pilot training, pilot training, pilot training. So I finally get to him. I said, Air General, understand you drinking Budweiser. He takes it from me, and now he stops everything and says, so, you probably want something like going to pilot training or something. Of course, the cat calls go nuts again. I'm like, well, yes, sir, yes, sir. He goes, well, I think you'll be a great pilot. And then allowed me to slink back. And so, fast forward to the next pilot application process, which they picked, I think, 50 a year or something like that. Anyway, General Gabriel had become the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And kind of fortuitous for me, because that's even higher than you, Safety Commander. And so, again, Ed Eberhardt, great guy, love the guy to death. He made sure that even though we were detached and everything, that the general ended up with my pilot training package on his desk as the Chief of Staff. The worst part about that is, showing my idiocy again, I get the package back. And, this is back in the day, and it still is today, I think. You're supposed to not have any white space, right? You're supposed to fill up every block. So, I had my squadron commander block. It had a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah.
And my wing commander block had a lot of stuff in it. And then the next one was whatever the top endorser you could get. And mine said, send Lieutenant Winters to pilot training now. Signed, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. 2 exclamation points. I remember that part. And so I bring it in, shyly, to my flight commander and go, I don't know. He didn't say much.
A lot of white space left
here.
A
lot of white space here. Of course, I got, summarily slapped for being an idiot. That, and I still didn't know how it all worked, how all powerful the Chief of Staff of the Air Force actually is. If he writes a one-liner like that, it's a foregone conclusion.
This will be done. I think again, for people who aren't quite familiar with it, the white space we allude to, I mean, for OPRs, the performance reports, I don't know, it's changed now. It's OPB. It took me a while to figure that out. Right. So
probably smarter,
but the white space, I don't know, if it could be 150 characters across the block.
Yeah.
You would figure out a way and change, hours changing words around. Like you can use a couple exclamation points across the whole form, like give you, so, but if you left white space, it was kind of a signal one, like, all right, obviously the bosses don't really care about this person. They're not really worth the time. So you got a whole block that you're like, hey, just wrote send to pilot training. There's nothing else. This can't be good.
It can't be good. Nothing about how great he is.
Yeah, all these magical words. Like, again, if you read my OPRs, right? Like I not only invented the moon, the next year I landed on it. So I think that's most of our performance reports.
So that's how I got selected. Of course, in Air Force, I got selected like in August or September, and they wouldn't let me out of my, data separation for Europe. I had to do my full 3 years in Europe, so I didn't get to leave till May.
Well, you've seen the other side of this, and I hate to I think it's good just point out of curiosity. Interesting when I hear you talk about being an EWO, being a backseater. We talked about reserving guard, hiring people off the street. It's interesting the way we handle manning. Right now, obviously, I want to go to pilot training right out of the get-go. Once you go and do something else as an officer in the Air Force, not going to pilot training, like you already said, maybe it's 50 slots a year. It is so much more difficult to become a pilot once you are already commissioned as an X, Y, or Z, not pilot, right? Whether it be a navigator, WIZO, contracting officer, you got better odds, I think, before that, which is interesting because you kind of have a known quantity, right? If, this Wizzo in the backseat has been a solid performer, you'd think we'd have like maybe a larger pipeline, like Wizzo to pilot. You're going to get them longer because they still now have the pilot training commitment. You just got to bring more young blood in.
Yeah, I think pipeline. You hit it. it's an investment issue in that we've invested in this person to make them, a very qualified, in my situation, instructor wizzo, taking younger guys out. And you just don't replace that with a guy coming in off the street out of wizzo. He's not an iWizzo right away where you trust him to take the guy, to not let him do anything dumb that some people try to do. And I think also it's a manning issue in that, all right, now we got to replace him. And there's a little bit of that age thing, but they had the age limit then, I think 27 or whatever it was. I think I was 26 and a half, so that we get a lot of bang out of sending him to this next training thing. So, yeah, I mean, I don't begrudge my time as a wizzo, and wizzos are very important in an airplane that needs two people for sure.
Is there an airplane that needs two people?
As you know, you guys talk about it a lot, and I don't want to, disparage my buddies that fly that airplane, but the
once per podcast, we got to do it.
Need is the operative word. The F4, you absolutely had to have two people for the way the ergonomics were set up. In other airplanes, maybe not. I learned that I could both track and drop LGBs by myself and actually hit the target, and other places maybe not as much. When I was stationed with them. No, I don't begrudge the community, because I will say this, and it just doesn't happen enough. When we had a very, very competent pilot, a very, very competent wizzo in an airplane working together, it was a sweet thing to behold. There was little communication. It was just, it happened. All the duties were delineated. But what would often happen, as I kind of alluded to, as soon as you got really good as a wizzo, they put you with the youngest pilot, and now you've brought it all back to the middle again. There's very few really, really super combinations. Now, I haven't done it in war, so I would imagine if they stick with the crew concept and you fly, every day in the prep and everything. Now, during the war, it's the same guy every day. They probably can get there. But in training, I never really saw it. There was a couple of spaces in there where I was just so fortunate that, it's me and an IP, and we were just singing along. But mostly it was me and the youngest F4 driver in the squad.
Well, that's what I can appreciate, never having flown a Strike Eagle, but having Strike Eagle buddies. And as much as we rag on the Strike Eagle community, if they do get it right, when you got the right team and they're in sync, I can appreciate that the level of situational awareness and
absolutely
how they employ it is going to be pretty impressive. And again, that would be a significant, when you start talking crew resource management in a fighter, that's a huge hurdle to overcome between personalities, capabilities, skill set, experience, etc. And if you're just changing it out day after day, tough. But doing a combat pair in the F-16 when it's just you and the same guy going out night after night, you can, for lack of a better phrase, finish each other's sentences. You kind of know how everyone's going to react and handle things.
And that's how it is in an airplane where you got it singing like that.
Yeah. So, but I don't know, maybe we should finish with a Strike Eagle joke just to make everything all right again. We spoke so highly of them there for just a brief second. We got to bring it back to reality, but no. Interesting to have that perspective as you go through as an EWO, the backseater. Do you think, as you moved on to the Viper eventually, I would assume that experience you brought along with you into pilot training and later on to career, obviously enhance your capability, enhance your toolkit as an aviator?
I mean, from the standpoint of being trained by combat veterans, I mean, literally, and they weren't kind, comments like you're in line abreast and you'd hear on the radio, my neck's getting tired. And that means you're too far back. And if I have to move my neck anymore to check your 6, you're on your own kind of thing. And I remember one distinct radio call, you're so close to eating pumpkin soup for 7 years. You better push it up. In other words, you know what? You're not taking this seriously, And so that was great. And then, frankly, I could fly an airplane after that. because on those cross countries, it was Wizzo flying. And, we had to make the timeline every year, and the weather was so bad at Han, had the worst weather in the Air Force, actually, that we would have to go out on 3-hour suck and blows with 3 tanks, and we would literally shoot 50 approaches all over Europe, and half of those would be mine. So I could shoot an ILS, a PAR, and in fact, on really bad weather days, if you had a good Wizzo, and these are the days where you might have to count 1, 2, 3 after minimums, or you're going to punch out.
I'm at my decision height now. Yeah. So there's runway.
What we would do is the Wizzo would fly the PAR, and the front seater would just have his hand on the stick staring out the window, and then you just hear, got it. And then you'd land soon after that and, wipe off your brow because you were almost out of gas. So, and then formation, I was taught instruments, I was taught formation. I could do a barrel roll in formation before I went to pilot training. Having said that, it did give me a leg up to start while everybody else is figuring out how their mass fits. And, the guys that have to look at their finger to make a radio call because they think they're talking to their hand. I was all over that. But we had some guys that by the end, they caught up. I mean, those natural sticks that we all know that feel like, they were born in an airplane and everything comes easy and there's no repeating anything. We had 3 or 4 of those in our class that caught up with me at the end. But in the beginning, certainly, it allowed me to be the class commander and try to mold some of that and help guys out, and we set it up, at least in my unit, kind of as a fighter squadron where we had a stand eval. So I had my smartest guy figure out all the right answers to stand-ups and everything. And then we would sit in the room when you were forced to stay there and we would go over those so that our class did very well that way. And I did some stuff where I was able to move some guys from instructors because I'd see that, a particular guy, one in, for instance, was not getting it. He had a really hard-ass lieutenant instructor, and he was not getting it. And I really felt that he was going to fall off the edge, and I went to the flight commander and said, we need to give him a different instructor. And we did, and that guy ended up going to weapons school and being a commandant at the weapons school. So, I mean, we were able to help some stuff. And I was a captain by then. I did enjoy some perks. And I don't tell many of this, but, you're in formal release where they won't let you out of the room. And around about 3 o'clock, we've been there since 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. The flight commander would throw open the door, another captain, and he'd yell, "Winners, get in here." And everybody in the class would go, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And literally, he'd slam the door. I'd sit in the couch. He'd open his refrigerator, pull out a beer, and say, "Here you go." He goes, "How we doing?" I mean, so I enjoyed that. And one more vignette for pilot training, I'll leave it at that, is that the tweet T-37 squadron commander was an old F4 guy. And he found out that my best buddy, F4 buddy, was an instructor in another flight. And he had already had a run-in with me, the squadron commander, where I was at attention because I didn't read the rules about the solo pole, and we had painted it orange all the way to the very top. I had one of my guys that had climbing gear. He climbed all the way up to this 35-foot pole, and we painted it orange so you could see it from the front gate. We thought it was great. Well, if you read the fine print about what you can do with the solo pole, you can only paint it 10 feet high because they didn't want somebody climbing 30 feet up in the air. So my arrival that day was, squadron commander wants to see you. I'd stand at attention from my flight commander. I go, "This isn't good." So I go in there, and he just rips me a new one, throws the rules at me on the floor, and he goes, "I thought you were better than this. I heard great things about you, but now I see you're this, you're that." He just rips me a new one. And then he goes, "You're dismissed." And I turn around, and I'm just about the door, and he goes, "Captain." I spun around at attention. He goes, "Shit hot." He goes, "But that pole better be brown by tomorrow morning."
Right.
So he says, "I don't care how it gets done," because obviously the kid with the climbing gear had to climb back up and paint it brown. So we painted it brown that afternoon. And so then he got this wild idea that I should fly with my F4 buddy. So I don't think anybody in the history of pilot training was able to go to the scheduler and say, hey, I don't need an IP for that sortie. I'll get my own. I was allowed to do that. So I would fly with my F4 buddy quite a bit whenever he was available from the other flight. So much so that I got tagged as a typical formation student, and they picked me to fly with the AETC Commander 4-star. And so my buddy and I had to go out, me solo and him with the student, for 4 extra rides to practice this scenario. So pilot training was not bad. It was enjoyable. Tough like everything else. I mean, you know what it's like.
Right.
12-hour days, all the grind, the early, people, I think our late started at 6 in the morning and early was 4 or something. I don't know, but it was a grind for a year, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have it hanging over your nugget there the entire time. You don't know how it's going to play out. And as you've already alluded to, right place, right time, a little bit of luck. You could be the number 1 guy in the class, and then turns out we're drawing down the Air Force, and sorry, you're getting banked. Or you'd be the number 2, and 2 months ago, everyone and their brother was getting a fighter, and this time around, only 1 guy is getting a fighter. So
and that's
a lot of luck and timing.
That was even back then. That was '83, and I wanted an F-16 in the worst way. I had actually had the opportunity to fly both in the backseat of an F-15, and Han was just getting F-16s when I left. And so I had 2 backseat rides in the F-16. And as you know, the first time you climb in that airplane, you're just in love. I mean, there is nothing cooler than a Viper when you shut that canopy, even in the backseat. And so I wanted one in the worst way, and it was the newest thing on the block. And my flight commander, who also was an F4 buddy of mine, kind of warned me. He said, there's no F-16s. You're probably going to get an Eagle. And I said, okay, I love the Eagle. I'm disappointed, but I love the Eagle. And apparently I found out later that the reason why we weren't getting any F-16s, and Willie was getting 6, another base was going to get 6, was that the timing between lead-in and RTU, I would have 4 less days to get there. So therefore, I could not get an F-16. And apparently, my wing commander, who was a stand-up guy, went to whoever you go to and said, this is ridiculous. I'm sure Captain Winters will figure out a way to get to RTU on time for an F-16. And so he basically manufactured, I was number 1 at that time, and he basically manufactured an F-16 for me. Again, luck, somebody going out. And I would have loved flying the Eagle. I would have enjoyed that, but I really wanted that Viper.
Yeah, you have to transition later in life. But yeah, the you say, luck, right place, right time. Again, too, being humble about it there, right? Like the wing commander doesn't go to bat for just anyone, so that's the piece I think probably you're controlling with work ethic, performance, that, the boss is willing to go to bat for you because you are a good dude, good stick, and we want to make this happen.
And I think you hit on it there, Rain, is that additionally, I ended up with the, top officer award, but that's because I took the leadership role seriously, and I was still able to do my thing and excel, but I was able to corral my people, and mentor them, and drive them. Since I had been in the real Air Force and many of the FAPEs hadn't, I would say, yes, you want to do this and you want to do well and you want to, and you bring up a good point. I don't want to belabor too much of this, but I was the class leader for Academy class. So they're just graduated from 4 years at the zoo. The zoo is what they call it for everybody looking at them as they march around, as you know. 4 years at the zoo. And so a few of them who I really recognize as top-notch people kind of were laid back, they busted the first critical action procedure, bold-faced thing, what's the big deal, And I grabbed those people in a room and I just ripped them a new one, and I said, essentially, I think you've just gone through 4 tough years and whatever. And I'm okay with that. But this year right here, this year is going to determine what you do for the rest of your Air Force career. This 1 year, not those 4 years you just came from. Okay. This year, you need to buckle down and excel here. And 2 of them ended up with fighters that I thought, had that kind of potential. And they did. I mean, that conversation, and I was a lot more colorful than that about, what might befall them in other areas, what their life might be like somewhere else.
Right.
And do you like being on alert, a week out of the month and all the things? Or do you really want to fly a fighter like you're telling me? And I said, if you want to do that, you gotta get on it. And they did. And I think I took that role seriously and we got, we started with 72, which was a lot. It was just when pilot training was ramping back up. We graduated 52. Some of those were medical, some were other things. But, I'm convinced that we got everybody through that needed to get through by, teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, it goes well for you. You do get an F-16 out of it.
Right.
Let's jump into the F-16 portion of your career, at least the beginning of that.
Sure.
And you go to RTU, I imagine, and we can jump into RTU if there's anything that's super of highlight. But Nellis is your first operational assignment?
That's right. And that's back when Nellis had an operational wing, the 474th. So you had everything that was going on at Nellis. Excuse me, 422, weapons school, all the things up north. And then you had a 3-squadron operational wing. It was great because of all the assets that were there that you could play with. It was tough because it was hard to get range space sometimes, but it was a great assignment.
I think even to this day, range space even gets more and more difficult, especially around Nellis with all the things that are happening around there. But being in that spot, I imagine it had to be just a primo spot as a fighter pilot when it comes to dissimilar, doing all the things.
We would do, because the 15 weapons school liked having bigger grapes than the 422 could afford. We did a lot of their support, because we were just regular F-16 guys they could beat up on. And, the other great things were the 4477th, the MiGs were up the street. And what happened there was if a unit dropped out of a supposed thing, then we got their leftovers. So we probably got more MiG sorties than most wings everywhere. So I'm pretty sure in other wings, not everybody in that squadron ever got to fly against them. In our squadron, everybody had gotten to fly it against MiG-21s and MiG-23s. And, that program was so awesome. I mean, that buck fever, the first time you go beak to beak with a MiG-21 or you get in a slow speed fight and learn that you shouldn't be there. You learn to beat them. I mean, that's just it. That was the whole idea. You could beat both. The MiG-23 was no challenge, but you could beat the MiG-21 fairly easily. You just had to keep your energy up and be smart. And if you tried to flat plate and fight with him in the scissors, you're going to lose because he could fly slower. So, it was a great, and like you said, having been a Wizzo, I had a leg up that I knew a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. So I was able to accelerate to flight lead and IP pretty quickly there. And that led to, we talked about the LGB thing. We got caught up in a thing with special ops to drop LGBs off the F-16 for the first time. And
this time frame wise, this is like 84 to
86.
like 88, 86. Like okay.
End of 85, early 86.
So, again, the Mighty Viper coming out of its conception of a day VFR lightweight air-to-air fighter versus what it is today as it has all these things bolted on, tanks, sensors, pods, weapons. while it can be the lightweight, just beast of a machine going out there doing air to air, often in combat and the way it's flown operationally, it's going to be a little bit heavier with a few things. But it sounds like too, like obviously in that period for you, that's kind of like the stepping stone, one of the first stepping stones out of that clean day VFR fighter into the multi-role fighter with LGB, laser guided bombs, which I obviously ushered in that, and more precision guided weapons from it. So I'd be curious to hear about that time period.
Okay. Well, first of all, the Cadillac that we flew then was a Block 10 small tail. Worst part about it was FICNIP, which was like the upfront control, fire control, something navigation panel, was on the left side. So whenever you wanted to switch anything or type in a coordinates, it was down on your left side, which was dangerous as all get out. Clearly when
Soviet ergonomic design there, yeah.
When they got to the C model, it was right in front of your face, as you well know, and it made life much easier to type in coordinates or anything else you wanted to do. And that thing was, it would do 9Gs all day long. It had the smaller tail, and it was less heavy than the Block 15, and it would kill you. It literally, you could do 9Gs for as long as you wanted to do it. That thing wouldn't lose energy. So it was great in the dogfight. But, it hung up more than later airplanes because of the small tail, as you know. When you get into a deep stall, there's not enough airflow over the stab to get you out of this position, and the airplane just does this all the way down. And no matter how much you push the stick, you can't get the nose over. And that's why there's the MPO switch, which is the manual pitch override that you would have to engage to give you more authority, which would probably tear the tail off if you did it at high speed. But it gave you enough authority that you could pitch the nose over. So I saw it wasn't as big a deal to go out of control back then. I never had to rock one out. I did quite a bit of what I call TALRAC BFM, and that was the airplane would do something that was totally not what I wanted it to do, and so I would grab both TALRACs and let it do whatever it was going to do until it finished doing that, and then flew it again. Because how guys would get hung up, frankly, was that they want to go this way, and the airplane would go this way, and they go, no, I said this way. And it would go, okay, I'll just do this instead, all the way down. And we lost a few for that, and, guys rocked them out. And then, so that airplane was not really designed to have the LGB. What happened is, I'll give you the quick version. Apparently, the special ops guys were working with the Navy and some other people, and they had done a couple things, and they weren't happy. So they went in search of somebody that they trusted to drop LGBs with ground lasing from them. And so I don't know how they got to our wing, but somehow they got to our wing, and I get a call in from the boss that says, "Why don't you go over wing weapons and talk to some guys?" So I go over there and talk to some guys, the standard Billy and Tom and Mark, no last names, no nothing. And they say, we want to drop LGBs off of F-16s, and the wing weapons officer and I were talking about it. And one of the reasons I think I was over there was I had done LGB stuff in the F-4. We had a paved spike pod, and we did a lot of that stuff. That was left over from Vietnam. So I understood LGBs and all the things associated with baskets and bang-bang guidance and all that. So I think that's how I got roped into that one. But it got deep. They talked to us, and they said, we want to try some stuff. And so we put together a 6-person team to experiment dropping LGBs with them off of ground lasing. Our INSs weren't that great back then. If you got an update, you were pretty good, but mostly you wouldn't want to, with guys on the ground absolutely needing your help, you would not want to drop off the INS for fear that you'd miss the basket and be ineffectual and maybe get them killed. So we ended up using the ground map radar at 10,000 feet and dropped them off radar in the F-16. So we practiced. For.
I just threw up in my mouth a little bit there. So yeah.
Well, you got to understand. You got these guys that do stuff for real.
Right.
Are asking you to be their guys if they go do stuff for real.
Sure.
And so, So yeah, we said, okay, we'll do it. So we dropped a ton of BDUs at night, making our own radar predictions off of hills and mountains and stuff, and anything we could use. And we got really good at it. We'd make our own, and we could we could shack a BDU within a couple 100 feet off a radar anytime we wanted to. So then we graduated to actual LGBs with those guys on the ground lasing, and we're shacking them, left and right. So then the real fun comes. They go, okay, we're going to go do something. We want you to do it. So they send me to a place on the East Coast, and I get picked up by a guy in a dune buggy in the dark, and he has NVGs on. I do not. And we commence to go racing through don't what. It's some kind of back roads with branches going. He's got NVGs. To me, it's just very frightening. And and he's talking to me the whole time, and I'm just talking to him like we're talking today. And I found out later it was a little bit of a test to see who they were dealing with as this lead of this group. Does he get famothed? Is he like flummoxed? What are we doing? Where are we going? Blah. I just had a conversation with the dude and said, well, if he dies, I die.
Right. We're in it together.
We're in it together. So we end up spending a few days there planning missions. And then we go back and we do a couple rehearsals. And probably the big thing there is, before MVGs, we would go one particular thing to kind of simulate what we were doing. I took a 6-ship from Nellis to the Holloman Ranges, made one radio call from Nellis to Holloman, and only came up on the radio about halfway through the return trip. And so it was to coordinate that we could do all this, calm out with a 6-ship, not talk to each other, not say a word. Not until we were on the tanker did we say a word. And we hit like 3 tankers during the course of that without saying a word, which was a lot of coordination and a lot of goodness. But and then we got to exercise night on the Nellis Ranges, and we did our thing, and then as a separate piece, but also integrated with them. And unfortunately, we had, I think, 8 helicopters going in to a site, and the rear helicopter crashed and killed a couple people. So, and one of my best friends was the ALO on that helicopter. So that was a long night. He was okay, but it kind of, I think they thought that at that point they were speeding in this thing they were trying to do, and maybe they should back off of it for a little bit. But I think I can say this without getting, the guys knocking on the door and coming in and taking me away. It involved kind of stuff that's more commonplace today. It was a HVT, that high value target that they wanted to extract from a country that you can't walk into. And if they did it right, it would almost be quiet enough to where it didn't wake up anybody that mattered until it was done. And we were basically there as a safety valve. If the hordes started chasing, then we were going to blow them up with a combination of LGBs and CBU. And it was really a trust thing, and they trusted us to be there for them. So that's a short version of about 4 months of my life. And consequently to that, in May of '86, El Dorado Canyon happened, where the F-111s went into Tripoli and blew up some stuff.
Yeah, so I think probably most people can follow along with a lot of that. I recognize. No, you're certain pieces being elusive intentionally, right?
Yeah.
But what I guess my takeaway with a lot of that, and this is a random segue, is the military over the last couple of years, I feel like occasionally gets a bad rap with like, it's too soft, we can get overrun. But your story there, I take away and I say, you know what, if the flag ever goes up, I know for a fact I got a lot of really smart buddies who are out there still solving very complex problems that hopefully will never have to utilize their skill set or their, pull a tool out of their tool bag that they put in there. But they're working with other smart people,
Right.
who are quiet professionals, leveraging new technology, solving complex problems, and it's pretty cool. And obviously the LGB of the day, right? That's something that's kind of new and sexy. The people that are doing out there going after high value targets, which again, I think today, I mean, that's the last 20 plus years kind of the GWAT evolution. There's a lot of cool tech that's gone into that.
This was 39 years ago, if you want to put a number on it. I mean, you think about that, that's a little crazy. It's crazy to me that it's 39 years ago.
Yeah.
But
a lot of the concepts still the same. The technology's changed a little bit, changed a lot of it, right? But there's still, I mean, again, we just got an example, this past summer of, if you think about what went into flying halfway around the globe to strike
absolutely.
Nuclear.
I mean,
right? Like,
they make that look so simple. And you and I know, and other professionals that do this for a living, there is absolutely nothing that isn't incredible about that entire mission. And because we have young people doing great things, they pull it off like, it's another walk in the park. And it is so complicated.
Yeah, and even in open source stuff, I'm blanking on his name. I saw Aviano put an article about his weapons officer. It makes looking like, man, you used to think like weapons officers are all old, right? But you're like, oh, I'm old now, right? Now you're old.
I'm very
old.
Right? I'm very old.
Yeah. So, but with the laser guided rockets, right? Laser guided rockets were kind of popping up as a thing towards the end of my time. And they got kind of popular, but now you're figuring out how to employ these laser guided rockets against drones.
You've got to, Rain. You've got to, because, a drone costs X, 30,000, whatever you want to call it. You're shooting $1 million missile at it or more. Yeah. That trade-off just cannot go on. Now you shoot a $15,000 laser rocket at it. Now the money starts shifting the other way. So, I mean, bright people doing bright things. I mean, you just can't keep doing the same thing. Yeah,
that's what I preach to the choir. Can we please stop slinging AMRAAMs at, $500 drones, please? I mean, again, if you got to do it, you got to do it. We're like, whoo, that's getting pretty expensive pretty quick, and it takes us a while to make them. So we got to figure something else out.
And people have.
Again, that's what I'm saying. There's smart people out there that this is not a problem that only you and I recognize. They're out there working.
Right.
Get it figured out. So, interesting. All right. So, obviously, it sounds like a very interesting time at Nellis, as most assignments at Nellis are. You go Kunsan out of Nellis?
I do. It was back in the day when, every F-16 driver went through Kunsan. That's just the way it worked. You had to do it. And so I did mine right after Nellis, which was awesome because if you go to Kunsan as an IP, you're pretty much in heaven. You fly all the time.
Yeah, nonstop. You got all the young blood that's rolling in there to the pin. Nonstop upgrade.
Yeah, I flew.
Right place, right time. Something like the rich get richer, right? So
5 times a week. 5 times a week plus 2 soft tours plus 2 top 3s was pretty much my life for a year.
Wow, I mean, you had it good until you said top 3. I mean, soft.
You had to do a little bit of penance.
Yeah, pay the piper, I guess.
Yeah.
We mentioned before we hit record. This is on a call beforehand. We were talking F-16 G-LOC. I know that's one thing you kind of wanted to bring up.
I mean, we've done a lot, and now with GCAS, I guess, which is the anti-collision stuff. If it figures out that you haven't touched the stick for a while, and we were pushing for that 100 years ago, it seemed like, but the technology just wasn't quite there. But we didn't have the centrifuge when we first started flying the F-16, and the problem was I hear a lot about G-LOC, but we were sucked into a paradigm that we didn't quite understand, and all of us that have flown other airplanes, you get gray out where the world starts doing this. And then sometimes as a Wizzo even, I would get blackout if I got caught with unexpected hard G's in the F4, which meant that I could still hear everything, but I literally, it was black in front of me for a few seconds. And then you squeeze and it opens up, you got caught. So I think we were caught in an idea that those kind of cues existed, throughout the G realm. And then unfortunately the F-16 came with a limiter, which meant no blending of the stick. So as you well know, when you decide you need to turn as hard as you can, you just yank on the stick and you get whatever the airplane will give you without hurting it, depending on what stores you have on board or whatever. So what we later found out was there is no gray, there is no black. It goes from I was turning to I'm waking up. And there was a little bit of phenomenon around the time where guys would talk to each other offline and go, hey, have you ever been in the airplane and kind of been fuzzy, and you go, yeah, I think that happened to me the other day, and so we got smart on our own. Of course, everybody's afraid to tell anybody because that's a one-way ticket to Brooks to get grounded forever. And so we kind of figured it out on our own where people, almost got killed. And then we had the unexplained, where you're in a fight with somebody, they do a hard turn, next thing you know, they're going straight down, yell at them on the radio, and they don't wake up, and they crash. And so that was pretty much a phenomenon. And then we started going to the centrifuge. I believe we started going to centrifuge about 86, where they started spinning guys up and going, oh, yeah, you can black out pretty quickly. We just hadn't done all that math, I guess. And so then everybody had to go back through the centrifuge and pass it, even though you were flying Vipers already.
That was my next question. Is did you have to go do it, or did you get?
No, you didn't get grandfathered it's great training. I mean, it really teaches you your cues. It teaches you that you got to get on top of that G strain, and you really have to work harder. As we know, there's nothing fun about centrifuge day. You're very tired after it. And but I think it probably saved some people. And the other problem we had back in that time was the knurl on the G suit was kind of loose, and we found it. You twisting around in a Viper, you would pull it loose, and so now you're G suitless pulling 8 and 9 Gs, and then you go, my G suit's not working. So they, why? Probably now you think about it, I can barely get this thing out. It's so hard to get out. That's why, because it used to come out on its own and leave people without the 2 or 3 Gs of extra protection from the G suit. But you talk about Gs. I think one of the finest things that we came up with was the not so much the upper G suit vest, but the oxygen that would shove oxygen into your mouth when you're pulling a bunch of G's. So it was inflating your lungs for you, for those that have never done it. And it's it becomes automatic. You don't even know you're doing it anymore. You just kind of relax your larynx or whatever, and the air comes in your lungs and pumps them up enough that you have something to strain against, so you don't have to force that air. That thing, I thought that, and I was older when that thing came out, I thought, oh man, this is great. I wish we had had this a long time ago.
Yeah, the pressure breathing, and then the helmet, having the bladder inflating the helmet there a little bit.
Absolutely.
But, did you ever fly with the A-tags, the new G suit, or
no? That I hear
that was one. Yeah, it was good. I think the concern was, well, I remember we got talked to going through the B course because it was kind of the transition period for it. A lot of the IPs had concerns and I think they mark it, or they say, it gives you an extra G and a half protection, something like that. Not quite sure how they figure that out, but it's probably a nominal piece. But the concern would be you get too lazy on your G strain because you have this new fancy G suit. It's going to save you, right? But I had two with the zippers that exploded under G, right? So if you weren't doing your G strain, now while it didn't completely go away, deflating, significant portions of it, in
those early days, people talk about the F-35, they talk about this, they talk about that. I think we lost 190 F-16s between 75 and 93. 190, I think, is the number. Don't quote me exactly, but I remember studying it once, for something that we were doing. Some of it was airplane fault. 55% or so was pilot error of whatever kind. Probably 35% are motors, and then 20% other stuff. But there was some design flaws in the A model with fuel control and stuff. And my flameout was my complete flameout was in an A model for a fuel control problem. So it was kind of a different time. Like now you'd go 190 airplanes and, that time frame, do the math.
A lot
of crashes. But, we had just come from Vietnam where they lost 500 F4s and 400 F-105s. So you have to train like you're going to fight, though, Rain. You have to train like you're going to fight.
Well, I think, too, the nice piece about flying fighters in the military for many reasons, right? Like, if you own that F-16, if Trapper bought that, you're going to treat that thing nice and gentle, and not that you don't take care of it when you're flying, but the whole point of it is to fly that thing to the limit, and max perform that airplane, right? Which, it'd just be like, I guess if you had a Ferrari and everywhere you went was red lined and, but when you pay the bill, it's a little bit different, but that's the whole point. You got to be able to max perform that airplane to its capabilities.
And back to the training thing, and I won't belabor it, but after Desert Storm, which maybe we'll get into in another podcast or whatever, but I was in Desert Storm, but I was training all the guys that were going over. We had guys come back and say they had harder red flag missions, except for the real bullets. You can never simulate real bullets and the adrenaline that goes with that, or near misses with a missile. But as far as complexity and some of the things in the Aggressor fights that they got into and these other things, and that was the whole idea of red flag, still remains. If you can get 10 missions at red flag, then those are your first combat missions per se. You'll do better in the real war. And so I'm a big believer in train like you're going to fight. And if that, every once in a while leads to an aircraft loss, you have to accept that, because the other side of that is if you don't train like that, you will act like you did in training, and we will have more combat losses and be ineffectual.
100%. All right. I want to hear about the flameout.
Oh, that one was pretty easy. So we used to do FCFs on Saturdays at Kunsan, functional check flights. So something that happened to the airplane, they did some maintenance that it required you to go out and wring it out, so to speak. Most of them were motor type stuff, some anomaly with the motor, and so you had to wring them out. And so at Kunsan, there's a T intersection where the runway is here, and you taxi out like this and go down the parallel. And the first guy to do an FCF takes off in front of me. And I noticed something's not quite right, because he's hovering close to the ground. And I go, I don't know how this turns out. And he lands going very fast. And then I see the hook drop, and I go, ooh. All this is running through my mind quickly. I go, what's that engagement of the barrier, 130? I think we're going to test that. And about that time, he catches the trailing, at the end of the runway, the barrier, and it rips the boat tail off the back of the airplane. So for all those people that say, hey, could you land on a carrier with an F-16? Well, I have observed exactly what happens if you try to land at 150 knots. It did stop him, but it ripped that whole back end of the airplane like this. So I'm at the T intersection. I call this off and go, I guess you want me to taxi back? He goes, that would be good. So I taxi back. They get rid of that airplane. We'll talk about what happened there another time. So 2 hours later, we got to get this FCF done. Here I'm back at the thing. I take off. If anybody's done an FCF, you go straight up with the airplane to 15,000 feet over the field, roll out, and immediately turn away from the runway and start doing engine checks. And the idea is you do engine checks right there in case something happens. Well, on this particular day, you go from primary fuel to backup fuel. I went from primary to buck back then. Now it's secondary or whatever it is, but then it was backup control, buck. And all of a sudden I hear that dreaded zzz. I go, oh, what does every fighter pilot do? You flip a switch and something bad happens. You put it back where it was. You move it, didn't help. So it wouldn't transfer back to primary. And of course, it goes down if you've done it before. EPU fires, which is our emergency power unit that runs on hydrazine. It makes a whirring sound. And all this is kind of like you're just sitting there going, is this really happening to me, you know?
Yeah.
So I immediately go through, start procedures. But I kind of figured it had something to do with fuel and fuel control, and probably nothing I was going to do was going to make it start. And then I started worrying about, all right, you idiot, this is all set up so that you can land in a flame out situation. And if you mess around too much doing this and ruin the flame out landing, you're going to be known as an idiot. So I stopped doing the start stuff. And you know how you do with simulated flame outs. You have some different prescribed altitudes that you try to hit. Well, I was like too high for some of it and too low for others. So now that's why we do different flame out approaches in simulation, in case you're coming from a different direction. It's not all like it should be. So now I start worrying about that. And then we always had the SOF on the backup on those things. So I said, oh, by the way, SOF, I'm flamed out and I'll be making a flame out landing here shortly, I hope. And of course, he's just had this whole thing with the boat tail, same SOF. He goes, say again. I go, oh, yeah, I'm flamed out. I'm going to land shortly. Roll the trucks. Of course, I can see him, papers going everywhere. So I just now had to figure out, I was going away from the runway the wrong way. And I just, went into smart mode and said, all I got to do is find base key from where I am. For those that don't understand, you have different altitudes at downwind, different altitudes at base. I think base was 2,000 feet. And all that matters is if you hit base at 200 knots or whatever, you'll make it to the runway. And so the rest was pretty much as you write about. I hit base key, landed, and it was a bad FCF day for Kunsan.
Got to send those back. You're going to need some more maintenance.
Bad SOF.
Yeah. Thank God for FCF flights, though. Ideally you catch it then when you're on profile.
Right.
Makes life a little bit easier, less of a rocket ride.
Yeah.
I know we're kind of getting long in the tooth here. We'll probably have to circle back for another round, but so some big things. I would like to hit on Operation Northern Southern Watch, kind of get your take on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then two, we really haven't highlighted, the fact you do transition out of active duty and have a very long and successful career moving up the ranks into the flag officership. So I'd like to jump kind of real quick over to Northern Southern Watch. And I imagine that time period, you're probably, I'm guess, 05 lieutenant colonel type, maybe getting ready, trekking towards the 06 route.
I was 05. And what happened was, and it maybe another time we can also talk about Bosnia, just prior to Grady getting shot down, because we were there just before that, getting lit up by SA-6s.
Well, actually, that would be good, actually, if we hit on that. We actually have a couple guys who are coming on the podcast. Good. I think that pair well that environment at that time period.
Yeah, and cut me off anytime. But the Guard and Reserve, after they got F-16s primarily, they were as competent, as good as active duty, a lot more experience. And because we were all over the world at that point, we're still doing northern and southern. We're doing Bosnia, no fly. They absolutely needed Guard and Reserves to sign up to go over to all those places for a couple, 2 or 3 months at a time. And so, because we're killing active duty, we're killing Aviano, with the Bosnia no fly. I mean, that's all they basically could do unless somebody came over and relieved them. They couldn't do any other training because it was a 24-hour op. And so Navy was helping during the day primarily. So we went over in the winter from my Bergstrom Reserve unit. We went over in 95 and night ops, no MVGs, primarily a slow mover chase helicopter thing. And so before we did that, I think I was in wing weapons then, and I came up, we got Civil Air Patrol to help us, and we started with daytime flying around in a slow mover and us trying to find it and then chase it. And then we actually did a couple of nighttime things, which was extremely scary. we ran around two ships.
Yeah. Yeah, nighttime, no NVGs, going after
Lights out.
helicopter.
Lights out. We're in a
I mean,
combat zone.
yeah.
Lights out. So we ended up doing some air-to-air TACAN stuff and blocks, and we adhered to the blocks extremely. We watched that very hard because we didn't want to run into each other. And you could kind of station keep on the radar a little bit without locking a guy up. And so we go to Bosnia, and we're the nighttime guys. And so every night, we flew every other night as a person. The squadron flew every night. And you took off around 9 or 10, and landed like 7 hours later, right at dawn or something. So long, tiring missions. And we would put a 4-ship into Bosnia Herzegovina, and you'd see them shooting on the ground and stuff. But the thing I wanted to highlight was that, even back then, the SA-6s would light you up with full missile launch. And because we had not been there, it clearly got our attention every time. I mean, every time I got lit up, which is at least 10 to 15, I was chaff and braking 5Gs and looking for a missile because I was not going to get shot down over Bosnia. But the fact, I don't like hitting on the political side too much, but they were allowed to do it by the powers that be back in Washington. They were allowing these guys to threaten us without us having the ability to retaliate, to try to find them, to bring some weasels in and kill them, which we should have been allowed to do. And in a later administration, that was the rule. Somebody tries to intimidate you like that, if you can, blow them up. And we were carrying air-to-air missiles and 2 500-pounders. So, we did that for a couple of weeks, and you'll like this part. So what you had to do was the helicopters would fly all night to resupply. And so you would find a helicopter, you'd light him up, you could tell it's a helicopter, you'd chase him, we'd get in an 8-mile trail, and we'd have to do a racetrack over top of him. And then one of you would have to read UN Resolution 721 or whatever. I'm not kidding you, buddy. So you're 781, I think it was. So you're trying to shine the light on your leg while you're flying in pitch black, while you're trying to keep a radar track on this helicopter. I finally memorized the damn thing. It was about 2 paragraphs long.
Were you reading this over guard?
Yes,
to this helicopter?
over guard. They're all over guard. And the worst part, about this was, if you called up, on your ALR 49, I guess it was, your radar warning receiver, if you pushed a button that allowed you to see surveillance radars, not just tracking radars, the whole screen was completely full. So they knew where you were all the time. They knew it all. They knew exactly where you were. So, you chase them around, you read the UN resolution. Every time they would land because they got guard on. And, at the end of that little speech, it says, land immediately or you will be fired upon. So they understood that, and they would land. And you'd stay in the area for a little while, and then you'd leave. So, I land one morning. I was a major then. I land, and I'd been up there 8 hours. And I get the message on the duty that says, KOC wants to talk to you immediately. So I said, okay. So I get on the phone to KOC. Some colonel gets on there and says, yeah, the general wants to know, quote, what the hell you did all night. And I said, first of all, I'm not in a great mood. I just landed after 8 hours at night. Crummy weather over the Adriatic, 4 refuelings, getting bounced around. I said, excuse me. He goes, yeah, we've tracked your do you know during your no-fly watch last night, 10 helicopters flew, around the country, uninhibited. I go, really? Well, that's peculiar. I said, would you please send me the information and I'll get back to you. So they send me the times. And these guys aren't idiots. So what would happen is we only had 4 airplanes in the entire country. And it's a country that's kind of oriented like South Carolina. It's like southeast to northwest, kind of like that. And so, we normally would have 2 airplanes up by Banja Luka, which is where, any of the hard wing people would probably fly if they were going to fly and bomb. And then we'd have 2 down by Sarajevo near the borders where they would fly across and bring supplies and men and whatever. And so, of course, I looked at it, and instead of going to bed, I stayed up for 6 hours, and I figured it all out. And what they would do is they're not dumb. Whenever a 2-ship went to the tanker, which took about 35 minutes or 40 minutes, in that part, whatever part of the country the other 2-ship wasn't, they would fly their butts off and do whatever. And I go, well, that explains it. I intercepted 2 or 3 that night. I didn't intercept these 10 because I was at the tanker. So I go to my powers that be, and I said, hey, we have a bunch of airplanes here. We could fly. Let's fly an 8-ship at night. Then when a 2-ship goes to the tanker, we'll have 6-ship in country. Nobody will fly. And everybody said, great idea. So I send that to the general at the KIOC, said, this is our schedule. This is what we can do. We can do that every night, blah, blah, blah. So I get a message like 2 days later, no, thank you. We don't want to escalate. So what Major Winter said, don't call here ever again. Giving us crap for missing an intercept. That's when you get frustrated.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
That's when you get frustrated as a fighter pilot, Rain, as you well know.
Yeah.
You go, okay, I'll give you a solution. Okay. And I'm sure they put it up to flagpole, and the flagpole said, no, I don't want to do that. So, okay, don't call here again. And they didn't. So, yeah, that was Bosnia.
Right. I mean, that's like probably as old as time, right? Like politics get involved in whatever conflict we see it today. Happened to you, happened to Vietnam, happened World War II. It's always happened. Like, Paul, what's the objective? Is it to win? All right, go out there and win, and we're not going to care about.
But then, you do realize you're a pawn. And I actually, said at that point to all my bros, I said, okay, somebody has just proven to me there is absolutely nothing here to die for, which is not the best place to be as a fighter pilot, in my opinion.
No. That's probably for a whole nother conversation another day, right? But you start realizing, well, if we don't really want to win, what is it we're doing here? Because what we're doing is not working, and we're handcuffing ourselves. So, yeah. And
think about this also, all the watches and everything, and I try to put this out of my mind every day. We're flying around on top of a single engine over all these bad guy countries. And the fact that we didn't, drop one for an engine and then go into a whole rescue for that is just a miracle to me. The thousands of sorties that we were able to accomplish.
It really is. And then, I mean, I fast forward to OIR, right? We had a Jordanian who went down, right? And the closest thing was 4.5 hours from him, right? So a lot of variables that go into it, and maybe a little oversimplification, but it's kind of like, were we postured correctly? Why weren't we postured correctly? I guarantee you the rescue guys probably were at least highlighting the fact that this is a limitation for us. We are not going to be able to provide coverage in this window, and someone up the food chain bought that risk, right?
Yeah, and it isn't our job, and having been, at the 2-star level, there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm pretty sure by the Constitution the military is overseen by civilians who make those kinds of decisions. We just like to make sure that they're informed of what the repercussions of the decisions they make could be. And in fact, when we left there, we stated emphatically, someone is going to get shot here sooner than later. And 2 months later, Scott O'Grady was shot down. It was just a recipe to happen. They had gotten bolder and bolder, and it was clear what they were going to do eventually. They were going to shoot at somebody. Right. But of course, that kind of backfires a little bit because that lit a fire, and we went in and cleaned out a bunch of stuff after that.
Yeah, trade-offs. Interesting. You touched on this, obviously finishing at the 2-star level. Naturally, that's later in your career, but I mean, I guess looking back on your job or, your role as a GO, your service as a GO, time as a fighter pilot, you've alluded to obviously, most of our bro chats and stuff like that. It's a lot of, you know, spilling our thoughts and,
You mean
on the current event.
after 50 years, we can't get travel vouchers right? You mean that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like why is this still the same thing we're griping about that I'm sure you griped about as an 04? Why can't the system get fixed? Or, is it fixed? Like, I mean, I don't know. Are we wrong in this perspective?
Oh, I think, and I've worked with a whole bunch of 4-stars, and I worked, we grew up together. I know you had mobile homes on, and, we've been fighting each other in Eagles and Aggressors, since the 80s. And then we were in the building together as 2-stars, just a brilliant guy who did a great work. And, the machine is almost too big to fix. You just got to bite off little chunks of it. And then, I'm not knocking our system, but pretty much every 4 years, a new set of ideas rolls in to DOD, and, starts dictating stuff. It's tough to keep continuity. And then we tie the hands. I know we're trying to get some acquisition reform, and we could talk about 3 hours about that. But we make it a little hard, But then again, just like our ROE and the stuff written in blood, pretty much a lot of those guardrails got there because something went awry. But we don't have a good system of going back and saying, okay, can we remove those guardrails or modify it? We tend to keep going and piling on. I had all my old bros from my first fighter squadron when I was a general working as the deputy operations officer of the entire Air Force. They would tell me all the time what I was screwing up. And I'm just like, man, there's a lot of just swimming to keep your head above water because the machine is so large. It's the biggest complex in the world, pretty much. It's run by a new set of managers every 4 years that you have to keep up with. And then you have Congress and the Armed Services Committee and that have to do their jobs also. It's hard to fix some things. Now, the travel voucher thing, yeah. Finance being open past 4 o'clock. These things could be fixed at the wing level.
Right. In theory. Yeah, I mean, it's like at some point, while we have a great country, great structure, and I think the principles of how it's founded, how it works is amazing. There's just some natural things that have woven itself into it that makes it challenging, like the turnover every 4 years. Or, I mean, if we could pass a budget, that might be helpful at some point too, to be able to plan stuff out.
That is hard. The CRs, and they were in when I was in there, and they continue today. The masses don't understand what a CR really ties the hands of military. Contractors don't know if they're getting paid. They're not getting paid on time. Their people are going to leave. All these things. I put that squarely on Congress's shoulders to fix that, and apparently they won't. But also, a guy named Mago Mueller, Lieutenant General type, well-known F-16 guy, pretty much one of the original, lieutenant types that got in the airplane. When he was the IG, when I was in the building, he set out a course to get rid of all these things that no longer applied. And he had put out as the IG, and he did some of the work at the wing level. I think he took some of the burdens off of the wing level for self-inspection and some of these other things that were irritants, and some of the computer training that somebody had levied on people. But again, the 2 years he was trying to do that, I think he made some headway. But sometimes you get in someone with more power says no, that's my regulation or that's my thing, and you can't do away with that. And some of it is law. I mean, somebody puts out an NDAA, you have to go by that NDAA, even if it goes against what you suggested.
I know General Goldfein, one of his big pushes, right, was taking a look at all the Air Force regulations, the AFIs. What do we need? What can we consolidate? You think this machine just over time, you just keep adding and adding rules and regs and policies. at some point it's just like this behemoth, but like, as you said, there's no good mechanism really to remove it. And I think there was some consolidation. I think there was some removal, but like in the end, like it's such a big process. And I don't know, I'm a little bit removed from it now, but maybe it's gotten better, but I'm venture to say, it's still riddled with red tape and bureaucracy. And again, it is a big bureaucracy.
Well, that's the disappointing thing for me. I left 10 years ago, and, I tripped upon your bro chat with Vader and Bender, etc. And I'm going, oh my God, all the things I even tried to fix the 4 years I was in A3, we still didn't get there. And I don't know that we ever will, as you said, but it's frustrating when I hear your generation, with a smirk, complaining about the same stuff 50 years later.
Well, it was one of my mentors. He was a C-130 guy. And at this point, I was a FAPE, and I'd come back, and I think I was griping about SOS and having to do it, do it virtual or do the distance learning version just to be eligible to do the in-person in residence. And I mean, he just chuckled. He'd been out for 25, 30 years at this point. He goes, and now travel voucher, the whole deal. And he's like, it's the exact same thing. The exact same bitches, gripes, and moans that you have now. Those are the same ones we had, and I'm sure they're the same today.
And I know Fingers tried to do good work, and I love Fingers and worked with him many times as he climbed the ranks. And our current new chief, Cruiser, and I go way back to when he was a lieutenant and I was aggressor. We've had many battles together. And then along our career, we've run into each other several times as general officers. He's as strong a candidate I know that, can help us get to some places. But, one person, we try to put a lot of stock in what one person can do. And as you alluded to, you're just surrounded by so many other factors.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, if this is me calling them out. Like if we're doing uniform inspections now, like I'd venture to say, like, what are we doing?
And I'm not going to speak for him. I think maybe I have to think that he has an idea that again, I'm not speaking for him, that might instill. Maybe we've gotten a little loose in our discipline, and I don't know the answer to that. And you'd have to ask him directly as to why he thought that was important, because I was taken a little back by that also, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, again, I'm making assumptions here, right? If I jump back to like ROTC and like field training, right? Like, all right, if you can't make your bed right, how can you wear it? Like, I would love to have that conversation with him to like hear it, right? Not that he owes it to me or anyone, right? Like if you're the boss and you're coming up with it, copy shot, we're going to press forward.
Yeah, if you can't adhere to some things as you're talking about, can you follow a TO to fix our airplane that requires exactness or disaster may happen?
Yeah, this is one of me as a field grader, as I push back. I'm like, you know what? If we need to fix the plane right and follow the TO right, let's fix the plane right, follow the TO right, and do it. If you don't, hold them to account for that. Right. Because I think even, unfortunately with this, they do an inspection and then the next day someone backs an F-22 into a stair or something, and you're like, well, we'll get there eventually. All right. So not to digress, but
it's fine.
I wouldn't want, I would not want any of these jobs.
Yeah. I mean, they're all tough. They're all tough, and it's nonstop. I mean, absolutely. My last year, and I don't want to belabor that part, but, I was on active duty my last year in the building, primarily as a deputy A3, and it just never stops. It just is what it is.
Yeah. And then too, I think probably not that it hasn't always been busy. Like it seems like the tempo is just so much busier today, whether it's, hey, maybe the same amount of involvement and conflicts and, presence across the globe is the same, but just the sheer number of fighter squadrons, heavy squadrons, personnel to begin with, it's half the number of what it was during Desert Storm, so the proverbial like do more with less, like we're doing more with less day in and day out, which definitely takes a toll. The iron is older.
How to slice that pie becomes difficult. And we set ourselves up for this. I mean, I hearken back. One of the biggest mistakes that our nation made was when we had a buy of 780 on the F-22, which got dropped to 383. And I was in the first time I was in the building, the Pentagon, refer to the building. First time I was in the Pentagon, we were fighting really hard that 383 was the absolute, got to be the number, got to be the number. And we all understand that some of those airplanes are for training, some of those airplanes are for tests. So you really don't get 383 combat ready airplanes. And that would allow us to be in a couple theaters at once, perhaps, to ward off badness with the baddest plane in the world, in my opinion. It's an incredible aircraft. And yet, the powers that be above the military decided that 183 was the number, which really equates to about 133 combat-coded airplanes. So it's almost like having this little gold-plated toy that can kind of only be in one place at one time, which was not the smart thing to do.
No, having more F-22s, I think you can't go wrong with more Raptors in the world. We just had this conversation the other day of how amazing it would have been to keep that line open. You obviously, I guess in theory, could restart it. That'd probably, it would take so many years, the retooling of a factory, the expertise, the capability to make that thing again, it'd be like next to impossible or just so expensive.
Right. It's cost prohibitive. It actually is. If you start from the scratch on that platform, it's old technology. You would be better served to move the F-47 faster, funnier to replace that. And I think that was a political decision to shut the line down because they didn't want this conversation to come back up again, frankly. In other words, they wanted it dead. Those in power at the time.
Yeah, interesting how that plays out. The other piece too, F-47, that's an interesting discussion in of itself. Again, this is another one we had the other day, the fact that as long as it takes us to procure an aircraft, like, again, I fully appreciate you're creating amazing technology, but if we, like the KC-46, I rag on that all day long. We take a 767 platform that is 30 years old and has been in a tanker configuration before, and it takes us almost 20 years to get it IOC is insane. You cannot operate like that. So let's say F-47, it is on timeline, which it would be a miracle if it was, just the way things go, right? Again, you're creating an exquisite piece of technology. Things are going to go right, even if it is great. But let's say when we do get it, like, is that the solution we need? Now they're saying open architecture. So all right, in theory, we could evolve this as emerging threats present themselves. But you put all your eggs in one basket, you create this exquisite piece of technology, and then maybe it does not solve the problems that you need it to, because we don't even know what that threat might be 10 years from now.
But you can't stand still. You have to keep moving with what you know. And so I think it's imperative that we have that airplane down the road. Where it all evolves, I'll be gone, really gone from the world by the time AI takes over. But I
don't know.
But
Elon said within a year we'll have AI that's smarter than like the smartest person, and within 5 of all of humanity. So maybe we're all done.
Well, no, Terminator was was probably the real future for us. Who knows? But as I look back on all of it, is there a better way to do it? Our system is clumsy, and I think if you go back and read history, it was kind of meant to be that way. We kind of make it clumsy on ourselves because we didn't want anything to get too far ahead. I'm talking the whole congressional overlook, the civilian overlook, all these things. I think we do the best we can within the guardrails. Can we do better? We can always do better. But I know there are people striving out there to do better. You know them, the people that stayed, in active duty that are doing it, the people perhaps in the reserve component that are bouncing back and forth of your era. We still will have people trying to do better at it, but we'll never achieve nirvana.
Well, that's why, again, as I alluded to before, as I gripe about these things, or if other people gripe about them, it's like, in the end, I know some of the very people, right, who are there to solve really complex problems should they present themselves, or they're working it right now. And so you're like, in the end, we do have some really good people, which is awesome to be. I mean, it's awesome to come and work with those individuals who have said, hey, I worked alongside of them, which is it's humbling for sure.
Yeah, and circling back, the Iranian attack is just incredible, and people just kind of chalk it up as, oh yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, you said that well. Like, people just chalk it up. It was it's a Saturday, or it's just your average Monday. But what it took, like when you hear General Kane, I loved his press conference talking about, the one guy sitting in the windowless room whose sole existence was to solve this problem, and then like, oh well, we need another person. Oh yeah, we need a new weapon to do this. You're like when it comes down to it, that is what's truly impressive, and bringing all these people together and executing that mission at that level is it's incredible, I think.
It is.
All right, sir. As one, I hope you're willing to hang around here for There I Was.
Okay.
We're going to do round two. But before we part ways, is there any parting shots, any advice you would give to young trapper, things that you think would be beneficial to know, something you might change, something you might do different?
You guys have said it in several broadcasts. Never give up. Never take the first no, especially when you're trying to break into the system, or you're trying to, go to, for instance, weapons school. For me, I was qualified and I was going to be the next candidate, and then they closed the weapons school for a class, and then magically I was too old all of a sudden and wasn't going to get a waiver. And I had planned for many years to that juncture, and I was a little taken back, but I quickly recovered. Ended up on a very short leash, getting picked up by the aggressors to go what was ultimately, maybe for another cast, the best flying of my entire career. My 4 years as an aggressor pilot, flying air to air every day, was and training the entire CAF was probably the finest assignment of my career. Probably even better than being a squadron commander and going to all the Southern Watch, Northern Watch. So just keep opening doors until somebody says, okay, enough. And somebody will eventually say enough. But, I had so many doors that I had to get through that weren't the door I wanted to go through, that I went through that door with, okay, now start looking for the next door. So I would encourage everybody to do that. And you guys do profess that quite a bit, that, keep getting to somebody that can say yes if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone will say yes, or you'll burn through every single door, but you got to probably burn through a few just to get to that point. But,
right.
Well, sir, I appreciate you taking the time today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
I look forward to chat to you going for There I Was. Thanks again.
Okay. Thanks, Ray.
15,000 and 90 some of that.